This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Become a patron today at patreon.com/intotheportal. You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
Hello, I'm Amber A.
And I'm Andrew McKay.
And you're listening to Into the Portal, your gateway to the bizarre. And we got a new film Friday, hey?
Yeah,
We're
finally.
calling it Cinema Saturday?
Cinema Saturday again. That's okay. It's all good. We're sticking with the spooky stuff still as well. This isn't one of the ones like Primer or anything like that. We're definitely piggybacking off of like lingering Halloween vibes with this one. We did watch it over Halloween.
We did, and then we revisited it just recently because it's still been on our minds. And we're talking about none other than The Nun. None other than... This is pretty recent in the franchise of the Conjuring world or universe, however you want to call it.
Right.
But 2018 here, directed by Corin Hardy. And, you know, this film, it was kind of one of those, it could have been real, like, some people will probably think it's, like, really cliche.
Sure.
And it didn't really get that great of reviews. But for me, I actually thought it was pretty effective. And I guess we'll get into that as we kind of unravel this whole thing.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's one of those ones that, you know, we're going back to, it's like classic Catholicism, exorcist stuff, like, you know, like demons and angels and what constitutes holiness. What is holy ground? It really makes you think about that and like what it takes to overcome such power, right? Of holiness, like what conquers that? Like what forms of evil are able to penetrate through?
On that note, though, like it was so different at the same time, it being, you know, the classic Catholicism, like you said, these kind of tropes, but it was an actual exorcism was absent, right? You know what I mean? Like comparatively to the other films in the franchise.
That's a good point.
Even though it is the same, but it's very much the same vibe, and you could argue there's more overarching, like the church is more overarching because it's an actual like appointee of the church sent on a mission to go check this out, as opposed to like the Warrens doing their independent investigations.
Yes.
Even though they're religious people.
Exactly. Yeah. They're, you know, it's very official. It's like
right.
Sent from the Vatican. He's a miracle hunter or a seeker or whatever they call him.
Yeah,
Father Burke.
Right, yeah. Miracle Seeker, I think, was the title, which is interesting. It's a very real thing, just so you guys, just so everyone knows.
It kind of is, yeah. It's interesting. And some of it is recognized by the Vatican, some of it not. But anyways, we'll get into that in a sec. Sure. But it's kind of interesting, though, because like going back to the whole idea of like, yeah, like the two sides of the coin here, good and evil, holiness and... what's the opposite of holy? Or what's the opposite of a miracle?
Right,
you know what I mean? And like what demons are lurking in these underbellies of our world and how we can access them, how they're released. And this is cool because this is actually a rewind, right? It's an origin story for this particular demon that makes various appearances throughout the franchise and the films. And it's actually kind of complicated. It was funny. Like there's many of them on YouTube, hey, like the Conjuring Universe timelines.
And that's the thing, you know, it's so funny. I think a lot of people out there, unless they're hardcore horror movie fans or obviously Conjuring fans, don't necessarily know that this is very much like Marvel or DC, a universe.
Yeah.
And that this is a timeline that's strung together, except it's a non-linear timeline. So this is the most recent film in the franchise, but it's taking us back to the 1950s as opposed to the 70s with the Warrens and stuff like that,
right.
Which I love. I love franchises that bounce around in a non-linear way.
Me too.
It really makes you think. It makes you wonder what's tied to what. But we do obviously, like you said, have this common thread of this demon we have yet to name, who is awesome and horrific and all of those things. Mm-hmm. Should we say it? Or is it like Voldemort? Valak. The Defiler.
The poker.
Vladislav the poker. Yeah.
Poker. But this is fun because, like, in this particular film, we're getting into the origins of this one particular entity that I said makes these various appearances throughout these films. And obviously, like, yeah, like you said, like, these are non-linear. So we've seen this demon before. And we've seen it even in the first one, too. But we didn't actually see the full rendering, I guess. So you could say it was inside, it was possessing someone at that moment. And that was in the Conjuring movie. And then in the Conjuring 2, we actually do see the full envisioned thing because Lorraine ends up painting it. Right. She has a vision, much like the sister Irene in this film, right? The protagonist in this film, right? She has these visions and she doesn't really fully understand them a lot of the time.
Exactly. We can come back to that painting in that other film too, and the connection with the nun and Valak, because to me in that, I mean, we might even just cover the whole franchise. I think we did a poll and people are into us doing that. But in that particular one where Lorraine paints the nun, it seemed to me like that was a silly thing to do. Like that's clearly opening the gateway. I mean, what else could you perceive a painting of that as? I mean, it's not just something to hang in your bathroom. You know what I mean? Like it's obviously going to let something in.
It seems strange that
she's just like exercising this. Well, exercising the demons is the pun, I guess. But like she's clearly just, it's a catharsis for her dreams or whatever, right? But anyway, I digress because this is a different film we're talking about today. But obviously the same horrific face.
The same face, yeah, and it's a terrifying face. And so we're going back to, like you said, the 1950s, 1952, St. Carta, Romania, whatever you want to call it. Romania.
Yeah, you put a little inflection on there, sure.
And we've got these two main characters. I like how it's a pretty simple plot as far as the characters go. They're not resting on too many people's acting chops, so to speak. And they have a solid cast. Even though it's not like an all-star cast, it's a very solid cast, I would say.
Yeah, was
anyone a weak link for you?
No, not really. I was disappointed actually that there was such negative reviews. I mean, we don't really need to touch on that, but I think I might get a little bit of pushback from this on social media. But this was I preferred this out of any of the films in the franchise. I mean, I love them all. But anyway, we'll come back to that.
We haven't seen them all actually. Or there's a few
coming
out.
I think there's maybe one in the Annabelle series we've missed a couple. There's like series, 3 or 4 in that series anyway, but.
So it's interesting because, like I said, it kind of starts off with an official recognition from the Vatican that there's something that needs to be corrected here or something investigated at least, at the very least. And so we get Father Burke and Sister Irene, who are kind of the duo sent to kind of tackle this case. And I like how Irene, they really portray her in how should I say this? For the 1950s, it seems a little bit more modern, a little bit more forgiving, less like the fear of God type Catholic outlook on life, and a little bit more open, ambiguous, which I think is why she is the protagonist, right? Because she's straddling this line of ambiguity with her faith and with herself because she hasn't taken her vows yet.
Right.
That's kind of a big clincher, I think, for why she was chosen.
And they opened the scene. Well, yeah, that's part of it, I think, because they needed someone who wasn't necessarily all the way done your vows, like a full nun, because clearly maybe there's people in the Vatican that have a little bit more of an inkling of what's going on at this particular place they're being sent to. And clearly the nuns there haven't necessarily been able to deal with it very well. But I did, to your point there about her being more progressive or whatever, that was an interesting first scene. Like she's surrounded by all these kids. She's got the dinosaurs, and then she's being, volleyed these questions from these kids about like, oh, dinosaurs aren't real. Like Sister So-and-so says they're not real. And she's like, really though? Like, do you believe in koala bears? Do you believe in penguins? Like they're not in the Bible, but they're like, so she's very much open to this larger timeline of the world, obviously.
Well, yeah,
and
totally.
that's I don't even know. I mean, that speaks to definitely some more progressive views from the Catholic Church too, as far as astronomy, different investigations into things. But then the flip side is demons, otherworldly realms, hell.
Well, it's almost as if they position her as an outsider or on the fringes right away, because it doesn't seem as though she is fully accepted for how she views things. Like her older sister, who looks like Maggie. Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting her last name, Maggie, but she plays
from Harry Potter.
Harry Potter, yeah.
Oh,
Maggie, and she's in Downton Abbey and all that, but
Right.
people are going to be just wanting to slap me.
They're
for
screaming it
forgetting
out
this.
right now. Yeah, sure.
They're screaming it out, but
Including Emily.
yeah, I actually thought it was her, but it's not. This isn't a big enough movie for her to make a little cameo appearance in, but very Maggie-esque. Maggie Smith?
You're spending too much
I think
time
it's
on
Maggie
this.
Smith, but anyways. But the way that she even makes the comment to Sister Irene, where it's like, you better get in your habit. Like, you know what I mean? Like, she's not fully embraced it or something. Like, she's not fully there, which is interesting because, again, right, when she is sent with Father Burke and they meet up with Frenchie, who was the discoverer of the body, the reason they're there, of the deceased sister who supposedly hung herself.
Right.
He has this immediate flirtation with her because she doesn't look like a nun.
And she's not wearing the garb, obviously, right?
No.
And even before they get to that moment where they're doing this investigation, like Father Burke says to her, he assumes that she's Romanian. He's like, he shows up and is like, oh, they said, you have ties there. And that's why I was asked to come pick you up. And she's like, no, I've never even been there. And he's like, oh, well, no worry, no bother or whatever.
That's weird.
And that's really strange because obviously there's the tentacles of the Vatican that know that she has these visions, that Father Burke doesn't yet know this, right? That she's got these other abilities, right?
Yeah.
That clearly there's some importance with her not having taken her vows. And they're not telling Father Burke everything. They know.
Oh, yeah.
They know what's been going on at this place. They know the reason why the nuns are there, and they don't want to say.
Yeah.
So that's the linchpin, and I love that because why wouldn't they just tell Father Burke? Why wouldn't they tell him? Why wouldn't they send more troops? You know what I mean? Like send a bunch of priests, but we haven't gone to that yet, people. Obviously, spoilers abound because we hope you've seen the movie already. But anyway, I digress again.
So it was the Vatican meeting, though, where they were saying, like, will this relic really save us?
Right.
That's interesting. They're already questioning the power of Christ. And this relic in particular, when we finally get a view of it, like this is towards the conclusion of the film, it's quite ornate and it's very it looks like a Christmas ornament with a cross with obviously like Jesus's blood in the middle of it, which is quite interesting. But they're even questioning the power of Jesus's blood.
If it's enough.
The power of blood's oh my God, I'm totally mispronouncing that. The power of Christ and the blood of Christ.
Right.
And
because this demon is obviously this force is just so powerful.
it's pretty freaky, man.
Yeah. And they kick it off right away, which I love. Everyone knows that I love this with these types of films, right? So it starts with essentially right in a dungeon, like the dungeon doorway, and these two nuns that are going down there to try, it seems like one last attempt at trying to do something. There's this really freaky deaky key that gets handed off to the final nun. It does look very scary. It reminds me of the Insidious, where it's like the finger key of the demon in that particular franchise. Super freaky. And then of course there's the Latin for God ends here on the door, which is just so awesome. And then there's
goodness.
The door swings open, the older nun gets dragged right in and is like screaming like what she knows what she has to do, the younger one, which is of course we don't know this yet. We don't really know why she throws herself out the window. Very much like we've heard in other stories we've covered in real life, like the elemental making people leap from the window at Lep Castle and various things like this.
Totally. Actually, that's a really good point. And we really have no idea. All we see is this like really creepy hallway leading into this door, right? Where, like you said, over the doorway, God ends here. And we've got all of these crosses everywhere. The cross imagery in this movie is pretty intense, to say the least. And we've got a plethora. It's almost as if nothing that is holy is enough for this thing. Like they paint that picture in so many ways visually in the film, right? With these crosses, with the decapitation of Jesus on the cross, with the turning over of the crucifix itself in the office as the nun is hanging herself in the very beginning scene.
Right.
It's like nothing is enough for this Valak to be like intruded by, or what am I trying to say? Like intercepted by.
Right.
Like there's nothing powerful enough. It's really creepy, actually. Now I'm freaking my
No,
ass
it
out.
is. I know. I'm giving me shivers, even though some people didn't like this. But there's also in that first scene too, and then throughout the film, the symbology of the forces of darkness kind of like overtaking like the wave of it, right? So like it's almost like that dark hallway in that first scene where the nun throws herself off, and then it's like as he approaches each step, it's like the lights go out.
Yeah, it grows. It just keeps growing.
It just keeps, yeah. It's like the tentacles keep extending further.
It's exactly. And another beautiful metaphor for that extension in itself is the fact that the nuns themselves are so terrified they won't leave the grounds, right? They will not leave the monastery castle. So they're within these stone walls, and even the deliveries, right, go into those stone walls, and then there's like a medium room, right, the delivery room,
right,
and then they go in, so they never ever leave. But when the last nun in that scene, the first scene, hangs herself, she throws herself outside the walls, and so what we see is a seepage of the evil outside of the walls, and that's why I think we get the constant flow of blood on the steps,
right,
throughout the whole movie.
It's always fresh, which
it's always
as it shouldn't be.
And then we do get inklings of this later on, the spread, right, of this insidious spread of this evil in the village itself,
which is almost
and the hanging of that girl,
right? Yeah, it does start to spread out beyond the what do you call this? Like a nunnery? It's
they call it an abbey, a monastery. They call it several different things.
And it's essentially an old medieval castle that's been, or it was that at one point. We find out later the reason why this is happening, which is really, really cool.
It's like Castle Huska.
It's very similar in a lot of ways. People would argue, right?
And the fact that they refer to it as cloistered. So these nuns in themselves, this is an important point, and this actually does exist. It's the idea that you live a very regimented lifestyle and you don't actually participate in wider society. You're kind of literally cloistered in a shell.
Yeah, it's almost similar
within the walls.
to me. It reminds me, it's like the Catholic equivalent to almost like a like a Buddhist monastery where you are very isolated and you're just doing your Buddhist chores every day. You don't really see the outside world. It's very isolated and regimented, and
it's meant to be that way. It's almost like with Rasputin, where it's like you're trying to access higher levels of being with Christ and with God.
It's about a meditation.
Yeah, totally. So it's like you eliminate all the distractions, and then you're kind of like centered around that, is what I would imagine. But I wish my life could be like that.
Totally. But it's so strange too, because obviously, like, going back to your point about the evil seeping into the village, it's weird because in the castle, like in the monastery, the characters are confronted with this figure, appears in different ways, as sort of like takes over a few corpses that they think are very much real nuns when they first arrive. We can get into that, which is interesting. But then the stuff that happens outside the monastery in the village, which we don't know about yet, is kind of almost more like, it's weird. It's not like it's Valak exiting the castle. It's just this seepage of negative evil. It's not like the entity itself showing up, Woman in Black style, offing a couple of people, returning to its lair in the castle, because it can't leave. It needs a soul to exit the castle.
Yeah.
So there's almost a multi-layer of like this darkness. It's the figure itself, and then it's the residuals of him just being in the area.
Oh, totally. Because even after, so let's back up a tiny bit here. Sure. So we've basically gotten to the point where Father Burke and Sister Irene have met Frenchie. They've had that little encounter. Frenchie has shown them how to get to the monastery. And then we get that little interplay where they go into the delivery room that I mentioned earlier. And that's where he basically tells them this is how he interacts with them. He never sees them, right? And then he left the body in there, but he left it laying down, and she's sitting straight up.
Yeah.
And then Father Burke tries to explain it away, saying like, oh, wait a second. Like, well, bodies are known to twitch long after death. And he's
it's like sitting perfectly. Like
clenching none other than that key that you mentioned too. So that's pretty important. And again, I wonder if, like you said, right? Yeah, like it's almost as if the grounds are compromised. They do have that perimeter of crosses again. We have more cross imagery. So that's important too, right? The idea that they're trying to maintain some sort of barrier, and they have different layers of barriers put in place, I think.
Right. And it's almost like, and in addition to that, like we don't know, the characters haven't learned what's going on yet. Like they're showing up expecting to speak and make sure the nuns are okay. But that body that's been moved from Frenchie leaving it lying down to now a sitting upright position seems like bait to me, because Valak wants this key. We don't know what it is yet, which I love. Like that's sort of this almost a side element to the plot, because they're there trying to figure out what's going on, but we don't really know what the key is for yet. But because he needs a soul to leave, it's almost like it's this creepy haunted house of like little breadcrumbs of
You don't
luring a soul in to try to
that's
now be able
interesting.
to leave.
That's interesting. I thought almost like the opposite, where it was like the forces of the nuns, the ghosts of the nuns themselves, were
that's a
trying to
flip side.
direct them to where to find the relic, because they
Right.
can't find the relic without the key.
They can't find the relic without the key.
So
And they know they can't find the relic without the visions that she has. So I guess that's the connection from the Vatican. They know they need her visions.
yeah, they need her to
Interesting.
connect to these ghostly nuns that have since passed.
Okay, so there we go. We've got to that.
We've gone
do
to
you want to
that.
talk about that for a second? Because they show up in the first nun they talk to is like the leader. What would you call it? Like the head nun or whatever.
Oh, like the one that's
Totally veiled.
alone, totally veiled. Yeah,
Freaky
but
deaky.
she's not. She's the wolf in sheep's clothing.
It's a corpse.
It is. It is
that
a-
is animated by this demon.
Exactly.
And they don't know that.
Yeah.
And it's got this voice, like I can't even do it, but it's
you
got this
think-
raspy voice that sounds like vocal cords that shouldn't be working anymore because they're like no longer alive.
Right.
You
And
know
she
what I'm
like,
saying? Like,
yeah, exactly. And she doesn't even move the entire time.
so it's this really off-putting first introduction, and of course they're sent away. They're not allowed to see the sisters that first evening. She tells them that there's lodging, right, for them, separate, of course, and this is where they end up going and seeing the decapitated
Oh yeah.
Jesus on the cross in the main.
It's like in the
main
chapel. Yeah, that's like a sure sign, obviously, that the power of Christ is not present or not powerful enough to overcome what is evil and what is there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're looking at it like, oh, this is some sort of a construction accident, or like maybe this tipped over and they're still waiting on like that glue order to come in or something, like, because
no
to
kidding.
me, that's pretty off-putting. I mean, Frenchie's looking at it being like, are you sure you want to stay here? And then he's like,
Exactly.
and then he leaves.
He leaves, yeah, because he's going back to the village. And then that's when he kind of gets more information from the villagers. Hey, we get that a little bit later on, which is interesting. And they basically say, well, you're going back for 2 more bodies, essentially, which is why I think he comes back early. He was supposed to leave them for 2 days and come back in the morning, but he comes back that night as
Right.
opposed to. But let's talk about, okay, so their first night in the monastery. So they're initially separated. The thing about this movie too is that they play on this a lot, this separation of the characters. There's not a lot of instances where Irene and Burke are together when things happen to them.
No,
Did you notice that?
It's almost it's almost like a Scooby-Doo-esque separation, going through the labyrinth of this monastery / medieval castle or whatever it is, right?
And totally plays into that breadcrumb metaphor that you were playing on earlier, where it's like the demon's like trying to do that.
Takes
almost.
the bait literally, Father Burke,
yeah.
right? Like there's that one instance later on where Frenchie, thank God, literally thank God, like shows up and saves his ass from some sort of a monstrous demon that starts crawling out, like just one of the minions of Valak that's coming out of another dimension or whatever. And it's all from him chasing a key on a string, like a little kitty cat. Like he's like in there investigating around, and then he sees this and he's like, oh, I mean, obviously what would you, I mean, you might look at it or follow it. He is tentative about it, but yeah, they're always separate, and he seems to be doing his own little Scooby-Doo things.
I guess before they got separated, though, they do have a pretty important scene where they're kind of like having their supper together, and they're kind of sitting around, and there's a radio, which I thought was strange because it's like, supposed to be a cloistered convent, or convent, sorry.
I think they brought it.
They probably did bring it. And like the lyrics, I couldn't remember what they actually said, but they were kind of suggestive and like talking about romance and a couple and being together and stuff like that. And
I don't think it was Ella, but it almost
it kind of had that
at a glance
sound.
of the ear had that Ella Fitzgerald vibe.
Oh, yeah. And then that's where we kind of get more information about Irene and her visions, too. So she confesses that to Burke, and he's like, he's starting to fill in a few of the gaps, but he's pretty much in the dark a lot, for this movie.
He's kind of a patsy of the Vatican, really. Like, they don't tell... He calls them out for that in that first meeting, though. He's like, there's something you're not telling me. And he gets a bit of clapback, I think, saying, like, there's something... I mean, basically saying, like, we don't know everything or blah, 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 whatever. Like, they just send him, like, not to his doom, but they fully know that it could be that.
Could be, yeah.
And thanks to Sister Irene, there's a close call we haven't quite gotten to yet, but I'm looking forward to getting to it.
Yeah, there's some pretty sinister forces at work. And Burke himself is compromised, and the demon uses his his inner like demons. Sorry for lack of a better word.
His past demons. Yeah, for sure.
Because he does confess to Irene in that evening too that he was responsible. He's seen evils before, and during the war, I think he says there was a boy that was supposedly cleansed by the church.
Yes,
but Burke knew that there was still something up, and so he went and continued the exorcism.
I think it was. I think he did use that term.
And then, so we did see some elements of an exorcism in this film.
That's like the only, true.
But anyways, it's not the main climax thing. But yeah, so he ends up killing this boy. So he has a lot of guilt and remorse over that. And that's what the demon uses against him. And so this first night, it's pivotal for the whole plot, because by the end of this, we get more information about what's really going on at the castle. But do you want to get into that whole sequence where Father Burke, again, he's like a cat and a mouse kind of thing, where he gets lured out by what he thinks is the ghost of Daniel. And he gets lured into the graveyard.
Right. Oof. I mean, I don't, it's awkward phrasing, because it's like this kid was killed during an attempted exorcism to like save him, obviously, right? But he's killed in the process. So obviously Father Burke feels a ton of guilt for this. Guilt is fodder for demons to be let in, obviously. But yeah, he's led out of the castle. He's out in this cemetery where they had been doing some investigating before. Like they were just out. Or what did they do? They buried the nun. They were like, we need to give her a proper burial. The one that they found clutching the key, right? And Frenchie does the digging or whatever, and that's where we get that little bit of history with the plague bells, and that they were for people who were buried alive. I knew of that, but I had forgotten until we watched this movie that that was a thing in medieval times, which is pretty horrifying. Imagine that. I mean, being buried alive is top 3 most horrifying things for me to have happen to you.
Oh my! But they say it kind of weirdly. They're like, if you were fortunate enough to be buried alive, you could use the bell to get out. It's like, well,
I
if anyone's
guess
listening,
you didn't have no kidding, right? It might just be a deer munching some grass by your grave. Like, yikes! And then, of course, later on, Burke is drawn back into the cemetery because of his guilt and sees this little boy, this ghostly little boy. It looks like from The Grudge. Really.
Totally. Actually,
but he's following him, and then of course he's knocked down into a pre-dug grave, and this is the ultimate. This is one of the weirdest moments in the movie for me, because he ends up buried alive in a grave that's not only covered, but covered with grass that's freshly grown, and we're left with this question of whether or not he was teleported in there by Valak, or if this is some sort of this demon's ability and immense power to control time, or the perception of time, because that's one of the lines when, thank God, Sister Irene hears the faint ringing from her bedroom at night of the bell, because he's frantically screaming and ringing this bell.
Right.
She manages to find him, uses her visions to overcome Valak, because all the bells start ringing, which is obviously extremely horrifying. She finds him, digs it up. Of course, the shovel's right there. I guess the one that Frenchie had left from the day before.
Yeah, I must
luckily. And saves him just in the nick of time. Like he's gasping for air, but he also has the hands of the demon grabbing his head.
Yeah, exactly.
From inside the coffin that he's in.
So he potentially was vulnerable in that moment. He could have been taken over.
And I want to make And I want to make a point as well that when we are shown Father Burke in the coffin, freaking out, he lights his lighter, his Zippo, after his flashlight goes out, and there's nothing in there. He is in there. There's nothing else in there. After he's saved and dug up and almost has his face jabbed in by the shovel, and he busts out, of course, there's a skeleton in there.
Yeah.
And a bunch of books.
Yeah, that's so spooky.
Very interesting texts.
Why? Yeah, what was this whole... So there's a couple of interesting things here I want to point out. And I don't know if this was intentional or if I'm just like, connecting dots that aren't even there. But these books are really interesting. So when we look into, like, they say that they're grimoires and stuff. So they're books of evil and how to conjure evil, which plays into the wider plot of like this whole, the castle itself, right? And how it was essentially run by a count. Was it a count or
a duke or something?
Duke, someone who was trying to summon stuff. So he had all these books, but these books are actually real. And there's a whole slew of them out there. And there was one in particular, I think the first mention of Valak, which is the demon in this movie. It's from the mid 17th century and it's called The Lesser Key of Solomon. It's a demonology grimoire. And so this is anonymous, actually. There's no author attributed. But in this book, Valak is described as an angelic boy riding a two-headed demon. And as soon as I read that, like, okay, this has basically no visual or like any other reference really to this particular iteration. Like they kind of obviously take a lot of their own inspiration and a lot of their own leanings with the character. But Valak, I kind of thought for a second, I was like, wait a second, maybe the boy that Burke was seeing that he thought was Daniel, the kid that he killed, was actually a version of Valak.
It's like a nod to the classical iteration of the demon.
Maybe.
Okay.
That's what I thought, maybe, because he's known, the interesting part is that he's known for finding treasure. That's kind of his thing. So he was directing Father Burke towards the treasure of books, the little trove that was buried, in a sense. So maybe in that way, but then
see, that's what's weird though. It's like, why would you do that? It's like he's kind of, unless you just want the competition, right? Like you want the church to come at you.
That's just it. And right? I think this is just my own interpretation based on that grimoire in itself, that demonology, whatever. This whole universe and this franchise doesn't really have anything to do with that. Like, they take their own leaps and bounds as far as what they're portraying, but I thought that was interesting for a second.
That is really, really interesting.
Because there's no, like, it's associated with snakes. We get a lot of that imagery and that type of thing, and that's not really associated with Valak and the real literature. Is okay.
He's like riding a dragon. He's like a boy, something like that. Which I guess is a winged boy. Like
it's almost like a cherub type thing.
Sure. To go back to the idea of treasure, like he's a treasure seeker though. Like that is an interesting juxtaposition, obviously, to Sister Irene and her ability to see visions, and the fact that they are looking for this relic, like this treasure,
exactly,
in order to get rid of him. It's like almost like this is the ultimate freaky, horrifying treasure hunt. Nun versus Sister Irene.
Totally. Yeah, that's actually a funny point. It's kind of, we don't get any iteration of that in the other films of this franchise or universe. So in that sense, it's kind of a weak thing to point out. It's just, I just had that thought when I initially looked into it. But anyways, I don't know what you guys think out there. If you think that means anything or not.
You'll have to let us know.
Let's get into the whole death of the nun, because that's another point that comes up in the mid point of this movie, and it really, again, paints a picture of what's going on at this thing.
For sure.
And we've kind of alluded to aspects of it, right, with this duke and with the church itself being taken over. The castle being taken over by the church.
Yeah, so basically, I love the scene that they do when they do the flashback, right? Yeah. So it's this cloaked figure that's this duke that's gathered up all this literature, that's created a lot of it on his own in order to summon demons. And then the line that they use when she's being given this story, Sister Irene's being told this story by one of the nuns that she meets and thinks is very much alive still, that this guy almost got roped into it, that the powers, the forces of evil ended up almost possessing him and forcing him into the practices that allowed this gateway to open. He was interested. It's almost like he was interested in it, dabbling in it, and then really got latched onto and used as the vessel to open the gates of hell, essentially, right? So they do this classic scene with like the Templar Knights storming in, slicing his head off or like slashing at him, right? And they're able to just barely close this portal with the blood of Christ. Yeah. And then that same relic is hidden in this sacred chamber within the castle. It's just so perfect for a story, right? It's amazing. And then, of course, the nuns have to have 24/7, 365 constant prayer in order to keep the seal like this, which is pretty gnarly. I mean, if you can't, and if that's broken, then the gateway can open again.
Which is exactly what seems to have happened. And this is Sister Iwana, and she's very pivotal in this movie. She's kind of like Irene's go-between with all the ghostly nuns and stuff. And she tells this history here. And this Dark Ages sorcerers is just so cool. And I think Iwana, she's the one that tells Burke and Irene to watch out for the other nun, because they tell her, like, we've been in contact with this other nun and blah, 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 and who is she? And she's like, she's the wolf in sheep's clothing, so beware. And that points to the idea that the gateway has opened.
Yeah. Oh, and actually to go back to that, we kind of skipped over before Sister Irene saves Father Burke buried in the grave. She has an encounter with the nun. Right? So she's in the chapel and she's witnessing what she thinks is all of these sisters still kneeling, praying, doing this constant prayer.
Yeah.
And she sees the decapitated cross, and then we get the shadow.
Yeah,
the same shadow that we get in the previous films. The same shadow
The Conjuring
that
2.
when she goes into her office and the shadow's on the wall and it walks and takes its form in the painting.
Yeah.
And except in this version, it's this towering, massive shadow, like all the way up the wall of the chapel, 40 feet high or whatever, as it slowly gets smaller and smaller. And I really did like that. Mm-hmm. But it's so funny how these demons don't have the ability to really they have to be in, like, I guess, the perfect situation to really get what they want or do something evil or kill someone, right? Because it's always just this kind of like scare tactic stuff. She gets screamed at and driven out of the chapel, and then that's when she ends up going and saving Father Burke. But it's almost like Valak's waiting for this right moment or something.
Or is she not vulnerable enough maybe to be taken over? Yeah, it is kind of interesting the way that you see this building up almost as if it's like posturing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or it's just for, scare.
Well, he does end up doing a little bit of monologuing actually when he's holding Frenchie, which was a little bit classic Hollywood for me. If I had one bone to pick, I don't think too many demons would do a lot of monologuing.
What did he even say?
He was just like chirping him. It was just like, you've never amounted to anything in your life
Oh,
or
yeah,
whatever,
trying to beat him down.
And
He's
it was
like,
just the classic
French
kind
Canadian.
of like, which is a great line.
Yeah.
Favorite line in the movie.
Can we touch on Frenchie a little bit here? Because he, like many characters in the Conjuring universe, appears in multiple films. Mm-hmm. And I do like how in The Nun, because this is a spin-off series. This is like Annabelle in the sense that it's not really directly conjuring. It's like, its own little side world kind of thing that bleeds into the others.
Sure.
And Frenchie's a great example of that because we actually see him in The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2.
Okay.
Or am I misremembering that? I think he's in that one, but he's definitely in The Conjuring.
Yes.
Actually, no, he's just in The Conjuring. Yeah, so it's interesting because he is portrayed, he's a different actor, but he's portrayed in the slideshow that the Warrens are doing at the university when they're recruited by the mother of the family. That I think, actually, no, am I misremembering? I think it was in The Conjuring too. Anyways, sorry guys.
Classic Amber move.
It is.
It's all redundant.
It's
which
all
one
redundant,
it's in
and I'm just sitting here
typical.
Just painting over it. But yeah, Frenchie, he ends up sacrificing himself essentially. And there's a weird 20-year gap-ish, or maybe 15-year gap, because this is supposed to be 1952. And he is exorcised like 15 years later. Because the Warrens in their presentation, they were saying how it was about, 6 or 8 years before, like previous. Yeah. And they were talking about how he was like a very troubled person and whatever. He ended up killing himself at the end of it, I think.
Yeah, that's how they, he takes his own life or whatever. It's weird how he's even latched onto by Valak in this, Valak. Vladik. What's that from?
Vladik. I don't know. It's a great name though.
That's gonna bug me for the rest of the day.
That.
It's from something.
Vladik.
It's from a book we've read or something, or
it's
Vladislav.
Yeah. True. Yeah, I'm getting those mixed up. Frenchie and himself, like the way that because you were talking about, right? He almost needs like a perfect moment where he can do a transfer point, this demon, this Valak, because Frenchie ends up being his carrier. So the evil leaves with Frenchie at the end of this film. But Frenchie himself, like he seems like one of the strongest out of the three of them. Yeah. In my mind, like, he's the least religious. Maybe that makes him more vulnerable. I'm not sure.
Well, he's clearly still religious. Like he's brought up Catholic or whatever, being French Canadian, but isn't, he's whatever. He's hitting on her when she first shows up at the house and stuff. He's clearly not like as extremely pious individual or whatever, right? Like he's he's a classic young.
But he's a good guy.
But he's a good guy.
And he ends up sacrificing himself essentially. He like throws her out of the way in the final scene. I'm talking conclusion here. And he ends up doing that quite early on too in the film. Well, he's very like selfless, like where he's like, oh, I've traveled all over the world. He's talking to Irene and she's asking him why he's here. And he doesn't belong here, supposedly. Like he's an outsider, but he feels connected to these people.
Right.
Which is, again, kind of weird. It's almost like lends itself to this idea that it's almost fates bringing them all together and aligning them.
In a way, because they wouldn't have been able to do it without him. Like I said earlier, he saves Father Burke. He ends up giving Sister Irene mouth to mouth and saves her in the end from drowning after Valak is pinning her underwater, and we get the real full view of the demon. A lot of the other images of him are very dark and shrouded in darkness and gray colors and stuff, which we love, which is awesome. Like a lot of people complained online that it wasn't scary enough, and I thought it was. If you watch this in the right setting, it's really well done how they portray the demon, in my opinion. I don't think they gave it wasn't like the reveal in The Ritual where people were really upset with that. I felt like they could have held back and showed less of that monster, made it a little bit more ambiguous. But with this, it's like you know what it looks like, unless you had never seen any of the other ones before. You hadn't seen the painting by Lorraine Warren, whatever, right? And obviously they chose this figure too. It's like, why the nun? I mean, this is specific for this franchise. Like you said, this figure is not that in grimoires from the 17th century. But that seems to be, I guess, the scariest modern version of what you could show yourself as a demon. I mean, it does work. It's horrifying.
Oh my goodness. I'm just thinking about that painting now from The Conjuring too. And when she turns off the lights and how it has like that luminescent glow to the skin and the eyes. And then she turns the light back on and it's totally different. And then she turns the light back off and it's like glows again. You're like, oh my God. If I had a painting like that in my house, I'd like, I wouldn't sleep.
You wouldn't. You wouldn't have that painting in your house, obviously.
Oh, but I already got your Christmas present. Whoopsies. Oh no. Do you feel there is something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Sometimes we need to ask for help. And these days, it's easier than ever to get started on the right track to mental well-being and happiness with BetterHelp.com. BetterHelp.com is an online counseling service that's there for you when you need it. You can connect with your specially matched professional counselor in a safe and private online environment within 24 hours of signing up. It's so convenient to get professional help from a licensed counselor. You can now get help on your own time and at your own pace. You can schedule secure video or phone sessions, plus you can chat and text with your therapist anytime. This is not self-help or a crisis line. It's a professional service, and if you are not happy with your counselor for any reason, you can request a new one at any time for no additional charge. BetterHelp.com is available worldwide with 3,000 U.S. licensed therapists across all 50 states, with 4 communication modes available, including text, chat, phone, and video. Financial aid is available for those who qualify. Guys, this is secure, convenient, professional, and affordable. And better yet, it's truly affordable. Into the Portal listeners get 10% off your first month with discount code PORTAL, PORTAL. So why not get started today? Go to betterhelp.com/portal and simply fill out a questionnaire to help them assess your needs and get you matched with your own counselor. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/portal to get 10% off your first month.
So let's get to where they actually are able to like oust Valak, because it's not like the power. It's not, just the knowing of his name. That's enough, right? Because we get that in the Conjuring movie where they go to the UK and he ends up appearing at the end, and she casts him out. She's like, I know your name, Valak, the Defiler, the Marques of Snakes. And it's like that in and of itself, because demons don't like to hear their own names, is enough to send him back. That's not happening here, even though Father Burke is kind of the only one who knows the name, because he's looking in the books that he pulled out of the grave.
Do they ever say it out loud, though?
I think he says it. He reads it.
Oh.
And that's the only time we hear it. It's not used against the demon. Instead, their only hope is this relic that's hidden in the castle. And he gets blood splattered on him twice, the nun. Once by Frenchie, and then the epic, you've got the blood of Christ. You're gargling the blood of Christ, basically, Sister Irene, because she's plain dead, and then spits it in his face.
Ugh, gross.
Which, yeah, pretty epic. I mean, that's a pretty epic way to make that happen.
It is. And again, right, it was almost like going full circle back to the beginning of the movie with the Vatican meeting where they're like, will this save us? And I think they get their answer. It's kind of interesting too, in the sense that they think they've sealed it back up, right? She thinks that the deed's been done, and by all accounts, everything's back to the way it should be, and it's sealed, holiness restored. And then it's kind of like playing on the incomplete or unfinished nature of Father Burke's earlier exorcism with the boy.
Right.
And the idea that these evils are almost too powerful, they're too great to be contained by these antiquated practices, perhaps. And then we do get maybe more forceful iterations of that with the Warrens and their practices. I don't know, though. Yeah. Because that is interesting how it seems so simple. All you got to do is know their names, like Rumpelstiltskin.
It's like almost like that will only work before they're able to gain too much power. And in this 1954 at the monastery, he's gained enough power. He's already, like, there's nobody's been praying. He's been there. The gateway's been open. And it's just, as opposed to some of the other films, you know what I mean? Like, I think that maybe is the reason why the name is enough in some.
Maybe.
I don't know. That's
I don't know. And I'm kind of struggling. Okay, so maybe can we switch gears a tiny bit and talk about like plot strengths and weaknesses here?
Yeah, sure.
Because I think this, again, just going back to the larger picture of the Conjuring universe. So we have the nun as like the genesis story of this Valak demon. And then we get the next sort of like mention, which is in the beginning of the first movie when they're talking about how Frenchie was possessed. And it's interesting here, there's a lot more to it. Like, this is according to Wiki Fandom, but it was like talking about how when when they're talking about this demonic possession, Ed in particular describes him as a third grade educated French Canadian farmer who was molested by his father. And I thought that was interesting because that's kind of a different portrayal than we get of him.
Yeah, that's not the vibe
in the nun. Like, not a world traveler or anything like that. He's just a... So anyways, there's that part that I kind of have to pick a bone with. But then there's also this idea... I don't really understand the leap between the French Canadian farmer story and then how this case has followed into England. You know what I mean? Like, how did it fall into the second plot of The Conjuring 2 where they're in Hatfield, England, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Well, I think...
And then it's puppeteering the old man ghost.
The ghost of the old man.
So that's like kind of weird,
for
isn't
me,
it?
Well, I think...
You?
Well, I think it just depends on how you're looking at it, because it's like, it's the perspective of like, yeah, these are far away geographically, right? In terms of years, in terms of distance, in terms of whatever. But if you're an exorcist, or if you're like the Warrens or like these types of people, you would probably just have the explanation of like, hell has no bounds. You know what I mean? It's almost like these demons, it's going to show up wherever it is going to work for them. It doesn't matter if it's just... right?
Why would they have multiple encounters though with the same demon? It just seems like too convenient almost. As a plot
it's
device.
clearly attached to Lorraine in some way. Like, it's stalking her around in some way.
And it wants her husband, right? Right. It wants Ed.
Exactly.
Dead.
It's on a mission.
It wants
Ed dead. But no, it's clearly on a mission. But it's sort of to the point of saying that, like, you know, if a demon can do something to someone in New England, then that same one could mess with someone in Bulgaria. Right? Maybe not at the exact same time, maybe in different ways or whatever. But it's like, is it different, or is it like, right? That's
negating the whole premise of the first movie, though, how it needs someone to move, to go. Like, you know what I mean?
You mean of the...
It needs a vessel.
Movie. You mean of the nun, like the one we're talking about today?
Yeah.
Like...
Right? Like,
but again, it's like we're just oversimplifying the context, I think, because it's like this one is about the origin point. The portal is in the dungeon of this castle, of this monastery. This is where it has the chance to leave. And then once it's out, now it can go about and do whatever.
So you think that there was
So
just
it
like,
hitches a
there
ride with
was
Frenchie.
a bubble essentially created around the castle, the bubble of
Yes,
protection. And then once
exactly.
the bubble of protection is gone, then it's just like,
Free for all.
Really?
It hitches a ride with Frenchie, and now it's out in the world. It's free. It can do and whatever it pleases.
A little bit convenient. So like for me again,
Don't
like going
argue
back,
with the demons, Amber. Okay.
Okay, I'm just trying to have a conversation here. So going back to the whole scenes where we see Frenchie being executed, oh my gosh, exorcised, and we see the face of the nun basically coming out of him, right? Like you see it transform into that, and then it basically screams into Lorraine. And there was one thing I read online, because it's been a while since we've actually seen that movie, but there was one thing online I read that said that Lorraine was given the vision of Ed's death in that moment where he's like speared by the thing.
Yeah.
And that scared her into not wanting to take this case that they're presented with by Carolyn Perron,
Right.
who is the mother in the second movie.
Sure.
Who's also in The Haunting too, by the way.
God.
Am I starting to overcomplicate everything?
I'd say you did that a while ago, but now it's the cherry.
But it's just like, okay, so basically this demon's attached to Lorraine. Is that what we're going to call that, the linchpin?
Yeah.
But why does it show up in this random house in England, just hoping that the mom will come to them and be like,
luring,
I need to...
Again, yeah, it's luring them. And maybe luring them out of familiar territory
This
into a
thing's just
place
way
where they're
smarter
more...
than I am.
Yeah, definitely. This is why I never want to bust out the Ouija board. And you're always like, let's just do it. It's fun. And I'm like...
If anyone could see the look I'm giving Andrew right now, it was
I know, and this is the same look I give Amber when she so cavalierly suggests summoning demons. No, I'm kidding. She's never
suggesting that.
She's never suggested that. But
I've never, ever. If anything, it'd be like our old dog or something.
so are you saying that you would bust out the Ouija board at a Romanian monastery like this?
No.
Okay, so
dumb.
then that answer in and of itself, you are saying that
You can respect the spirits and access the spirits. Come on.
how much are you buying any of this in the real world? As far as like something like this actually happening.
The plot of this film actually
I mean,
happening?
forget all like that was funny too because we were doing the research for this, you guys, and like 2018 apparently was like a really big year for exorcisms. The Vatican was like training more people for them, more reports of them than any other year before. And in Italy, there's a ton. I don't know what's going on with my Italian family over there. I'll have to reach out and ask. But there's like 500,000 a year or some crazy number, which is like it's a ridiculous percentage of Italians that claim to be possessed or know someone who's possessed or whatever. But this is like something that is very much a thing. There's figures like Father Burke that go looking for miracles, treasures, relics, trying to beat back the demons. I don't know if a place like this exists, like this Romanian monastery. I'm sure it does. If anyone listening has heard a story about such a place.
A Castle Hoska?
Other than Hoska that we've referenced already. But thank you for reminding me again. But, right? Like, I'm buying it. I mean, I wouldn't set foot in this place. If I saw a decapitated, like, and I was brought up, like, originally Catholic, went to church, a different church as a young boy, and then stopped going, and I'm like I'm
were you ever
agnostic, right? But
were you ever involved in any like the ceremonies, like the rites of passages in the church?
I mean, when I was super little, probably. I
probably
can't remember.
Baptized is probably about it. Eh?
That's probably
you didn't go through
about
like confirmation or anything.
Oh God, no, I don't think so. I mean, all I remember is eating a couple of wafers and you know.
You're like not even
the grape juice.
You're like an eighth Catholic,
right?
Not even.
Right. But anyway, it's
So bottom line here, we're taking the Ouija board with us when we go to Eastern Europe, right?
Right.
Okay.
We're booking flights to Romania once that's a thing again, and we'll let you guys know how
we'll
this
find
goes.
our own little vial of Jesus's blood, and
right.
You know what I mean?
That's so. Yeah, I mean that's something I wanted to leave open for you guys too. Amber, this is just straight. We're going. It's just straight blasphemy. Eh? We're gonna burst into flames here.
Probably.
But that's interesting too. Like the idea of these relics being real. I'm interested in that. You know what I mean? Like that ties into lots of stuff that we've talked about and we have still coming on Patreon too, with like tapping back into some interesting Nazi legacy stuff, and like they were looking for the spear of destiny and obviously the Holy Grail
relics,
and these types of relics that were believed to be very real, very powerful.
You know, I'm sorry, guys. I don't mean to. I feel like Andrew's painting me in a bad light here.
No.
Actually, I'm painting myself in a bad light where I'm like kind of sounding a little bit callous about all of this. And I don't mean to sound callous because I actually genuinely am pretty open to it all. Like, I'm not discounting anything, to say the least. And I honestly think like some of this in some ways is real. And even just now before we decided to record this, we had Unsolved Mysteries on, and there was that one really famous guy, some dude, he was a father, and he had the marks of Jesus on him. Like, you know, like I can't remember what they called it. They had a specific word for it. I'm so sorry, guys. I don't have all the terminology, but it's like basically looked like he had been up on the crucifix.
Gotcha.
And he was able to work miracles. He was like, anyways, he was a crazy guy. So I really want to explore more of this, to be honest. There's a few other things like the bleeding
like the statues and stuff. Sure. Yeah, definitely.
We're getting off track here. Sorry.
Well, kind of.
I'm trying to redeem myself.
Not really, though. As if you have to.
I feel like I do.
I think if I was going to finish off my final points for this, like I had 3 moments that I absolutely loved in this movie, and they were 3 more comical lines. One was from Sister Irene when she opens up the door that says "God ends here" or it blows open or whatever, and she just has this very classic like, "Oh God," like where she literally that's the line. Yeah, that's probably what I would say as well. Obviously, Frenchie's line where the nun is monologuing and the demon is kind of just talking shit, and she says it says something Frenchman, and he says, "I'm French Canadian," and then throws the blood in his face. That's pretty awesome. And then also my favorite, when they find the relic and Father Burke is past it and he's holding it in his hands and he's like, and Frenchie's like, "Holy shit." And he's like, "The holiest." That was great.
That was
great. And I love it when you can pepper a little humor into a horror movie.
Yeah, they were effective with that. And nothing seemed like it was like being exactly like made fun of to any degree. It was taken quite seriously. I really did enjoy the setting of this film too, in Romania. Like just that castle, those shots we got were beautiful.
I think that's why it's my favorite of the series, because of that.
Yeah. And I do like it when it's a period piece as well, and I like that period of the 50s, and I do like how they connected. They had a lot of flashbacks to previous films, so it's really easy to connect all the dots and kind of see where this is coming from.
Yeah.
Was there anything else? Special effects. Like, I thought the special effects was pretty good. I didn't really have any complaints. Like, maybe in 10 years we'll be laughing, but I don't know.
But I think a lot of the fact that it was so dark will save it. I think it'll stand the test of time because of that.
Almost like the Lady in Black. I thought that actually stood the test of time, and that's what, at least 10 years old now.
Something like that. Yeah, totally. And again, like I feel I like horror movies where it's not guts and gore necessarily, even though we love things like The Void and things like that as well. But there's a lot more implied horror with The Nun that I love.
Conceptual horror.
It's conceptual
spooky.
horror. And even, I don't care who you are. The people who watch this movie and weren't, it's not like I'm cowering under the blankets or anything, right? But if you're watching a movie like this and you're not scared, watch this movie and go stand in a freaking nunnery or a monastery by yourself at night. You're going to be scared. I don't care who you are.
Big screen is pretty effective.
It was definitely effective. We want to know what you guys think, though. Definitely, I'm curious about what you think about the whole series, too. Like, we're going to cover the whole franchise, I think. We're going to do the canon of the Conjuring and haunting stuff.
The Annabelle ones are going to be, there's like 4 of those.
That might be a bit of a slog, but we'll
we might just cover all of them in one episode, though. That might be a good way to do it.
Just do a big extravaganza. We could do that.
Extravaganza eleganza.
We could do a ghost version of that. Yeah. If you guys want that, let us know. Comment on social media. Hit us up. Follow us at Into the Portal Podcast on Instagram, at Into the Portal Podcast on Facebook, at Into the Portal 1, the number 1 on Twitter. Yeah. And we're super active on there, so come chat with us and let us know what you think about this episode, what you want us to do for future episodes. We're always open to more Film Friday ideas, for sure. Or Cinema Saturday ideas. Also, don't forget to check out our podcast network at Strange Podcasts on Instagram and straightupstrange.com, where we have the full lineup of shows for you guys to check out. Coming soon. We've been working on that.
Website redo.
That's right. And as always, thank you so much to our Patreon supporters, our producer,
Stanley.
I tried to tee that up as a little bit more of a like us doing a what? No, seriously, thank you, Stanley. That's
Stanley Capazorio, and I'm totally butchering.
Did
that.
you butcher that again?
Capazorio. I think it's Capa.
It's one of those names where you just really want to enunciate.
He said they really
Italianness
South Africanized it, and I don't know what a South African accent sounds like. And so I'm
New
thinking
Zealand.
maybe it's like
I think
that.
it's just a little bit more New Zealand.
I was New Zealand.
South African? No, I
South
don't know.
African,
I think we're going to get some pushback from all of this, but
sorry, Stan. he asked for it though.
yeah. And actually, he's already been tossing out some awesome ideas, and as well.
Yeah.
Our next regular episode, not a cinema episode, is a suggestion from Aaron Bloom, another patron of ours for a long time. So thank you guys so much for all of you on there. And if you haven't checked us out on Patreon, the link is in the show notes below. So you can click that and check us out. Yeah,
we have a little fun, you want to call it an Easter egg on there that we just put up. It was like a video.
Oh, yeah.
A private video.
Patron-only exclusive access, behind-the-scenes video of Amber and I.
Into the Portal TMI edition.
Let's just say it's a pretty hilarious photo shoot behind the scenes.
Yep.
So our patrons get the pleasure and or the pain of watching that.
But so choose.
Anyways, we really enjoyed this movie, and we hope you guys did as well. So as always, thank you so much for listening to Into the Portal,
your gateway to the bizarre.
This podcast is a part of Straight Up Strange Productions. Discover more shows like this one at straightupstrange.com.
Whatever you're funny, Peacock's got it exclusively. Stream classic sitcoms like The Office, Parks and Recreation, and 2.5 Men. Plus, catch Peacock original comedies like AP Bio and Saved by the Bell. For all your exclusive comedy faves, go to peacocktv.com and get started.